He's arrived. Elladan, also known as the Shield of Rivendell, is our second marquee character within Lord of the Rings, Heroes of Middle-earth. Today, we're going to take a look at his adventure, Thunder and Lightning, run through that, level him up as far as our resources allow, and then take a more in-depth look at his abilities than we've done in previous videos, and then try him out in Arena and Campaign. For the first 4 tiers of his adventure, you get given a 5-piece pre-made team. This team is scaled up to a level that it easily will run through these 4 sections, and that will net you 25 shards per mode, giving you a total of 100 shards and allowing you to unstock a 3-star Elladan. Interestingly, for these modes, the characters you've been given are maxed out with regards to their ability levels. So you'll see on the descriptions from them all, they're operating at their most powerful incarnations, including for Elrahir here. What Elrahir here? That sounds interesting. He gets a 100% retaliation chance if he has an ally who's being attacked that has provoke or taunt. We also see some enormous damage numbers coming out from his special too, and even Miri, who, whilst I like her as a character, is a bit lackluster. Even she is able to dish out some really impressive amounts of damage. So we continue to run through these nodes, and this is quite a nice little mode. It gives the less experienced or less familiar players a chance to understand what each of the abilities does. It has a little bit of blurb at the start, running you through a little bit more information as well. So I think they've done a pretty good job on the structure of this. Even if some of the feedback I've seen from the community is that tiers 5 and 6 were maybe a little overtuned, although I think we'll be able to get through them with our team. 2 stages down, 50 shards acquired so far. Let's move on to the third one, and that'll get us another 25 shards towards unlocking Elladan. So again, still using this pre-made team that's been put together for us, and this time we're talking about Ancient Skill, which is his special too, a nice big AoE that also grants him stacks of Provoke. The team they've given us here to use on this node is an interesting one. There's a fair amount of synergy, and it's not dissimilar from what I'm using in Arena currently. However, in place of Miri, I am running Strider. I find that he is a better fit for the team. He's a pretty tanky character, as we all know, but he also brings a significant amount of damage as well. I am working on a Rangers tier list, which will be out in the next week or two, and you will see that Miri is lower down that than the rest of the Rangers. She doesn't quite justify a spot on the team for me currently. We will save the rest of that conversation for the tier list we've been talking about. For now, let's continue with the 4th node, where we get a little glimpse at the passive, the Shield of Rivendell. This gives him on turn a chance, or a 70% chance, I should say, at max level to gain a stack of Nimble on turn. Originally, this was going to be 100%, but it looks like they've decided to dial that back a little bit, which is a little disappointing. I was very much looking forward to all those extra stacks, but between the passive on Arwen and 70% is still a pretty strong passive. It's not something to get too upset about. But we have completed that, and that's going to allow us to summon Elladan. We've picked up the offer for him as well, which is going to allow us to actually take him up to 4 stars initially. The 5th tier of his adventure only requires him to be at 3. However, the final tier of his adventure needs you to open the chests that are within the store until you've got sufficient shards to take him up to 5-star. So we won't drag you through the experience of taking him through every single one of the gear tiers as we build him up, level him up, and add some of his abilities. So we will skip ahead as we've promoted him up to his 4th star with some of our hard-earned gold. We have been hoarding for the past couple of weeks to be able to do as much as we can with Elladan. We'll have to see whether or not we can fully max him on day 1 to our character level, but we've skipped ahead, and for now taken him up to level 40, gear tier 7, and level 4 abilities across the board. So we'll go into his adventure, and we'll have a try at the Thunder and Lightning Marquee level 5, where of course we need a 3-star Elladan. So the important thing to understand about tiers 5 and 6 is you no longer get that juicy, souped up versions of the other characters. And from what I understand it seems the characters you're given are actually scaled to the level of the abilities that you've invested in your Elladan. So we've seen across the community people trying this with various different levels of investment. For me, this didn't feel great, and it was certainly missing some of the damage we'd seen on the previous nodes, and a pretty significant change in the amount of healing done. Look like we're on track for victory. It'll grant us those resources and allow us to move on to the final tier, just as soon as we've opened up our chest and made sure that we've hit the minimum requirement of 5 stars. The, of course, added benefit of taking Elladan up to 5 stars is that's going to help you with getting ready for Lord Elrond, who's going to be our first legendary and requires 5 elves at 5 stars. We can see here, just as a reminder, that the passive for Elra here is back down to a lowly 25%, so certainly not the fun that we were having on the earlier nodes, where we get a little bit of a glimpse of what the future might look like if we continue to invest in that Ranger or Rivendell team. With the 5th node out of the way, we can see that the 6th node requires that 5 stars, has a juicy 500,000 gold as a reward, as well as some of those highly coveted epic level ability materials that are needed for the highest level of leadership abilities. So we can start to see as we run through these chests, we had a good opening with a 25 shard before returning to the much more common 17 drops as we go. And we open several of these until we make sure we have enough shards of Elladan to take him up to 5 stars. Therefore meeting the requirement of the 6th and final stage of the Marquee event. So with a couple more chests to go, we're then going to be in the right position to click that all-important button. And there he is. Another 150,000 of our hard-earned gold is going to take him up to that 5th star and allow us to jump into the final level of the event. And this final level definitely did feel more challenging than the previous ones. And just like the last one, we will run this at a higher frame rate, so you're not going to have to watch every single one of these attacks play out. If you are looking for a little bit of strategy, whenever going up against this team setup, I would always focus down this Mordor engineer first. They do have a lot of nasty AoEs that they're going to throw out, so it's worth trying to get them off the board as soon as you can. Morza is the character I would leave to the last, as although he does have that pesky ability to remove some of your buffs, most of that is single target, and his damage is far less of an issue compared to the other characters. So with the engineer out the way, we switch our focus to Ugluk, definitely one of the more impressive characters on the shadow side of things, and we can see that on our side, our brand new shiny Elladan has already bit the dust, and we're having to rely on the other characters as we find ourselves in a 4v3. And then Halbrad taking an ungodly amount of damage there has put us into a 3v3, but thankfully, as one of the two on the other side is Morza. Again, I'm not too concerned, so we are able to whittle down Mahur and finally get ourselves those big juicy rewards. So 500,000 gold, 250,000 character XP, and another 10 of those very precious epic ability materials. So with that gold in hand, we can now go back to Elladan and see just how much further we can push him. And we take him up to level 52, which is max level for me currently. And as I understand it, on the journey to level 60, that's about halfway through the total experience you need to reach the level cap within the game. We have, however, thanks to some wise decisions in our hoarding, been able to take him up to gear tier 8, and we've got enough ability materials to max out, to take level 5 on one of his abilities. So running through them, looking at the different options that we've got presented before us, I think the wiser choice in the short term is to do his special 2 Ancient Skill, as that is a nice big AoE, and 30% damage on top of that is very, very useful. Now that we've taken Elladan as far as we can in the short term, we'll take him for a spin in Arena. His stats, as you can see, are pretty impressive, and we're going to update our older Arena team by dropping the excellent Ironhide and instead replace him with Elladan to go alongside Arwen, Elrahir, Halbarad, and Strider. We've been hanging around the upper regions of Gold 1 and the lower end of Mithril 2 for a little while now, so let's see how he gets on. This is a little bit of a punch down for us, so maybe the safest way to start our new Arena team. This very common opponent we've got here, you see an awful lot of this team. It's one that I like to work on by focusing down Halbarad first. We've all seen that once people take his heal up to level 5, it can really swing the tempo of a fight if he gets a second or third application of that. So the enemy Ugluk has applied blind to Elrahir, which is a little unfortunate, as it does mean any of his retaliations in the short term are of course going to miss, and it doesn't allow us to get off his big special too early. But we're going to use special 1 on Elladan, especially as he's already starting to gather some buffs. This is going to put some stacks of Provoke and also give him an application of Deadly. The enemy Halbarad coming in and missing due to the Nimble. And at this point, we're going to throw out a heal just to try and offset some of the incoming damage. We are very worried about Elrahir biting the dust, so we aren't able to get the benefit of his big special 2 due to the blind, and the regens from Arwen are going to help again to further offset some of the damage. This team plays a longer term strategy where you're looking to out heal a lot of that incoming AoE damage. The basic on Elladan allows you to apply a stack of Weaken, which you can use strategically on enemies that are going to do a big AoE to try and reduce that. A more sensible move perhaps would have been to have applied that to Ironhide, but our focus here was very much about trying to get Halbarad down as soon as we can, before we can then focus on some of the other characters. So as you can see, we are still in a 5v5, with us a little bit of ahead in terms of overall health. Ancient skill from Elladan here is that nice big AoE, and at this point we're able to put the taunt onto our Halbarad to try and help maximise those retaliations from Elrahir. The enemy Halbarad dropping there at the start of his turn due to the burn effect applied by Strider as part of his special 1. Burn is linked to the damage stat of the character that applied it, so the more you invest in Strider, the more you're going to get out when it comes to damage over time effects like that. If you are a little bit confused about the various boons and banes within Lord of the Rings Heroes of Middle-earth, I will be doing a video in the coming weeks that breaks them all down and hopefully will form as something of a quick reference guide for you. So we can see here we're still in a 5v4, and we're just about able to stem the tide of this AoE damage that's coming in. Our next target that we're trying to focus down is Ugluk. He's someone you don't want to leave till last, as he is quite a difficult character to 1v1, which is also worth mentioning with regards to Lady Eowyn. On turn, she's going to be applying stacks of defensive to herself, as well as also gaining counter attack, so she's not one you really want to leave lying around for too long. As this 5v3 continues to develop, we're continuing to remove those negative effects, those banes, as well as trying to get some regens on ourselves. The incredibly damaging special 2 of Elrahir there being able to be shown. That team-up attack is only going to work when you have both Elrahir and Elladan. If you don't have Elladan there, he will only be doing 2 attacks rather than the very impressive 4. Now we've got ourselves in a 5v2. I think we're pretty safe here. Of course, as I say that, Strider immediately dies, and then we're down into a 4v2, but then it's a 4v1. So whilst Ironhide is quite a dangerous character in the hands of the AI, he does continue to use his abilities in not always the most favourable way. So we're able to whittle him down. Another big heal from Halbarad all but seals the deal, keeping us safe. We're able to put Weaken on him from Elladan's basic, which will help offset some of that incoming damage. We can get Expose on him with Elrahir, and Arwen and Halbarad can continue to throw out these heals. So In the short term, I'm going to continue to use this as my arena team. There may be some more effective combinations out there using either Brute or Ironhide, but I'm very much enjoying it, at least until Lord Elrond comes around. Now we find ourselves moving into one of the harder nodes in the light campaign, and we'll speed up the footage here again, just so you can see how this plays out. This was a node that I wasn't able to previously 3-star on the hard light side of the campaigns, so this is a good test run really of how well Elladan works. Now, the light team on the whole don't particularly struggle in the campaign, in my opinion. They do have some very strong characters. They've got a lot of healing. And of course, when Lord Elrond comes around, you're going to have access to a res as well, which will be the first character in the game that you're able to resurrect a fallen ally, although it is restricted to fallen elves, I believe. You're not going to be able to just resurrect any light character. With the final wave of this node under control, we were able to get the Goblin short fuse out of the way before he was able to activate that somewhat devastating AoE. Once we've finished up these last couple of characters, we're going to do a run through of the different abilities that Elladan has and make some suggestions on how far you might want to invest in them to get the best return on your resources. Things off, we're going to take a look at its passive, the Shield of Rivendell. In the short term, I would advise taking this up to ability level 4 to at least give you the best chance of nimble outside of maxing this out. If, however, you find that he is getting covered in Banes, and that's impeding what you want to do, especially keeping in mind the interactions of Lord Elrond's abilities, you may want to take that to level 5, but in the short term, I would hold out and see how that feels. Already getting yourself a boost to resistance at level 2, and a chance to gain nimble on turn all the way up to 60%, is a pretty strong passive, although not as good as we saw in those earlier previews. Up next, we take a look at his basic. His basic is a straightforward single target damaging attack and has a chance to apply the Bane Weaken, which will reduce the amount of damage the enemy character does. I advise taking this up to level 4, as that will ensure that you always apply Weaken, and the tiers before that are going to bump up the damage a little bit. It's nothing to write home about, but this ability isn't really about damage, it's more about applying Weaken. Due to the way some of his other abilities work, you may not use his basic that often. His special 1 is what you're going to use on turn 1, and I would suggest taking this up to level 4. The levels before this is going to give you additional stacks of Provoke, Regeneration, and at level 4 you're going to gain Deadly to yourself, which sets you up nicely to have that ready for your special 2 on turn 2. The ability to dish out Deadly to your teammates is useful, so something to consider for further on. His special 2 Ancient Skill is something you'll be able to use on turn 2, and I would suggest taking this up to level 5. The damage boost at level 5, considering this is an AoE, is something that's worth looking at. Level 6 for this is very impressive as it will reduce the stamina. This is something I think you might want to hang on to until you see what you're doing with Lord Elrond. So this has been the review for Elladan. I hope you found that helpful, and we'll see you soon.